Hey everyone, it's Tom here with Dragon Ball FighterZ, and to join me to talk about this game is David Beerton.
Hey Tom.
So this is a unique game in many respects because, of course, it's using cell shading, but it builds on Arc System Works' efforts with Guilty Gear Xrd, of course. I don't know if you've any experience with that game, but certainly I'm a big fan of it, and you've been covering this game in terms of the comparison work. So what's your first impressions of the technology being used here?
Right, well I've played a reasonable amount of Guilty Gear at home, and then moving on to this, I've been spending time comparing this across multiple consoles, and the one thing that I noticed between the two titles is I think that Arc System Works has kind of refined their technique in terms of trying to replicate 2D sprites using a full 3D engine with Unreal Engine 4. So in this case I think that the images appear a little bit crisper and a bit closer to 2D artwork.
Yeah, the technique Arc System Works used with Guilty Gear was revolutionary at the time, and it's very similar to what we got here. They've refined it, and the idea is they have to avoid a typical 3D logic to the way these geometric models are presented. So the shading of the character will almost have to be sort of manually tuned based on the way the camera's moving. So there will be fixed camera angles as these characters go into special moves, and there's a lot of sort of fine-tuning on how they'll be presented. Because obviously with 2D animation, the angles of these characters and the way they're lit isn't always very logical. They're based on limitations, sometimes budget limitations, and that adds to the style. And it's that sort of restriction that they're trying to simulate here. That means you can't get away with, say, what we had in Budokai was, full pans around cameras where the lighting would be a bit more even. It is a very, very authentic take on the animation. And that even goes down to the frame rate, which is, something of an odd subject for us to tackle, because obviously at Digital Foundry we're sticklers for the best frame rate you can get from a game. But with Guilty Gear Xrd, I was looking at it thinking, you know what? I do prefer this lower frame rate. This actually works because it reminds me of the way the anime actually functions on screen. Yeah, certainly that is an amazing thing to see.
Yeah, I guess the whole frame rate thing here, the game actually is sort of running at 60 FPS in terms of the 3D models move across the screen. All the scrolling is done at 60, but obviously things like the punches, kicks, different animations are handled at different frame rates. So like with Guilty Gear, some of the animations are operating I think at around sort of 7 or 12 FPS. The background animations like the waterfalls are at 60. So you really get the kind of illusion that it's a hand animated title when it isn't, which is, I think it's really, really impressive. I think it's probably the best reproduction of a sprite based title using a 3D engine.
Yeah, definitely the frame rate stuff is interesting. Obviously some creative license in terms of how the gameplay runs. When you're in cutscenes and special moves, the camera actually locks to a similar frame rate to the animations. The animations usually run at about 15 FPS, some parts of their bodies at 12, some at 8. It varies by the character. But when you switch to gameplay, that camera unlocks obviously to 60, which you wouldn't really want to have any other way. That panning motion really has to be at 60 to make it work as a 2D fighter. So accepting that it is a phenomenal technical showcase and that it's running on Unreal Engine 4, I believe, which is an evolution of Guilty Gear Xrd, there is some comparison points to cover here, and you've taken a look at the base consoles first, haven't you?
Yeah, so I've taken a look at base consoles and the mid-gen refresh machines. What we've got here is base consoles running, so PS4 and Xbox One. And, well, these are pretty straightforward. In terms of the resolution, both are running at a native 1080p, so they look really crisp, clear, well suited to the kind of hand-drawn style art they're going for as well.
So, accepting that the resolution is 1080p on both, are the visual settings also on par between the two?
For the most part they are. I mean, if you take like the basic artwork and the texture details and the alpha effects, all of those are rendered to the same standard, same resolution. The only thing that I could pick up on is the shadow quality. So on PlayStation 4 these are rendered at higher resolution than on Xbox One, so you're getting slightly more refinement there, which actually, if you're looking at it during gameplay and you look closely, it does kind of stand out in those sort of opening moments before the fight gets really frenetic. So that's pretty much it in terms of the difference between the two platforms.
It sounds a lot like their tweaks across platforms for Guilty Gear Xrd actually. PS3 ran with lower quality shadows to the PS4 version, and when you look at the game in general, there's not too much you can really change. I mean, texture work is kind of limited to the ground there, but most of the characters use flat textures as per the cell shading. So generally speaking, there's not much you could change besides resolution and shadow quality, and the resolution is matched between the base consoles, so that leaves the shadows. Now, quick question, easy to answer I guess, frame rate, what are we looking at?
Well, really there's not much to discuss here. You're getting basically what every fighting game fan would want, and that is a solid 60 frames per second across both platforms, in terms of there's never any unintentional frame rate drops. Whenever the characters are scrolling across the screen outside of those cutscenes where frame rate is deliberately lowered, you're getting 60 frames per second, so absolutely no problems there.
Of course, our tools are measuring the image as a whole rather than the individual components, so obviously the readout is 60, but yep, there's parts which are running deliberately at a lower rate. But that being said, it's a very good turnout then. I'm pleased that it isn't leaving anyone out generally. Okay, shall we look at the enhanced consoles, because I think that's where some interesting numbers start to come out, and Arc System Works have kind of pushed it in the only ways they can. Resolution wise, what are we getting with the PS4 Pro version?
Okay, so what we've got here, we've got Pro, Xbox One X, and we're actually playing these simultaneously so we can get a really good like-for-like comparison across multiple areas. In terms of resolution, both versions support, a 4K mode where the pixel counts are vastly higher than 1080p. On Pro, you're looking at 2880 times by 1620, whereas on Xbox One X, you're looking at 3264 by 1836. So kind of, I guess you could say, about 1620p on Pro and just above 1800p on Xbox One X.
That's okay. I think there's very little in the way of jagged edges in the first place, even with the 1080p signals from the base console, so to have this as 4K support is kind of a good move. How does it look on a HD TV to your eyes, in motion?
Well, I think it looks great. The thing with most of the games we cover, when you've got resolutions below 4K, like 1620p, on more complex titles where you've got a lot of high frequency details, sometimes you can kind of notice the upscaling, but you'll note that the clean lines, very little in the way of fine detail, means that the visuals can upscale quite nicely. And in this case, both versions look really crisp on a 4K screen. I really wouldn't be able to notice that much of a difference between One X and Pro here from regular viewing distance. It really is very subtle, but both look a lot better than 1080p.
So again, it's an advantage of the source material being, so stylized that they can get away with such a clean image quality despite it not being native 4K on either console. And I think it's one of the best looking games I've seen on all four platforms we're covering here. Visual settings though, what is the difference between the, say, Pro or Xbox One X version compared to a base console besides resolution? Is there nothing? And how about comparing them together?
Alright, in terms of PS4 Pro to begin with, I didn't really notice any differences in settings. I thought shadow quality might have had a slight uptick, but it might just be the upscaling of the 1080p base hardware version that's creating those softer shadows. The actual shadows themselves look very, very close across PS4 and the Pro. Xbox One X though, different situation. You've got much higher quality shadows on X compared to base Xbox One, so there's a big improvement there.
Okay, and between the enhanced consoles, what's the difference there then?
Again, it's like what we saw on base hardware. You just get better shadow quality on Xbox One X compared to Pro, but not a huge upgrade there. It's quite subtle, but yeah, it's a slight boost nonetheless.
Cool, so easy one to answer this again. Frame rate metrics on these two enhanced machines, 60 FPS I guess?
Yep, locked 60 frames per second, no problems there. That's one of the things that really stands out for me with Arc System Works titles. I remember Guilty Gear, solid 60 frames per second. This is solid 60 FPS, where on some other titles, like when we were playing the netcode on, I believe it was Street Fighter 5, there was a few dips here and there. Other games like Tekken 7 can have momentary frame rate drops. So it's great to see a game that absolutely solidly delivers in terms of performance, especially considering it is using the Unreal Engine 4. And from what we've noticed on the current fighting games that use the engine, there's a fair bit more input lag compared to, say, the older versions of these games, like the previous Guilty Gears on PS3.
Yeah, that is an observation. Maybe something to look into in the future, but for now, certainly one of the best fighting games we've played in a while, sort of newcomer in terms of the franchise name, and it's great to see such an authentic take on the original animations. I mean, it delivers exactly what it set out to do. Okay, so that about rounds up our coverage of Dragon Ball FighterZ. Thanks for joining me, Dave.
No problem, Tom.
If you did like this video and want to see more coverage from Digital Foundry, do give us a like or subscribe down below. And this being a 4K video, it's well worth checking the source file to this on our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net. But until next time, thanks for watching.
ごはんさんの意志は俺が継いでいる。